Okay, and the final part of this development blog, I will be explaining how I got the wasps to go down, to fly down, and when they hit the bottom, and when they hit the bottom here, they move up, they spawn into a different point, like in a different location. As you can see in the top x-axis. I'm gonna have to try not die because it's very sensitive. Yeah, and you can see that they're spawning into different parts of the x-axis up the top, and when they hit the bottom of the x-axis, then they spawn in a different part of the top of the x-axis, and etc. Okay, so we're going to open the actions when I find it. There. So it's very complicated looking at it. I'm not going to lie, this was beyond my level. And this was like totally beyond my level, and it's going to be very hard for me to explain how I've done it. So I'm gonna try my best though. So basically, I got the information from this link, ilike2flash.com, and basically it's a tutorial to make something to generate a random number. So when you press this button here, a number will randomly generate. And so first off, you have to create a function called random numbers. And within the brackets here, the random numbers is going to be from the minimum. So this number here is titled minimum, so it's going to start from the smallest. And the max is basically going to end at the max number. So when you're starting from 0 to 1000, then on the scene here, something will spawn in between 0 to 1000 and to basically 1200 pixels, which is the resolution. So from no pixels to about 1000 pixels is where wasps will spawn. And then in between the braces, I had to create a variable, and the variable basically is the result. And the result is the number which equals the maths, which equals math. And I had to randomize the math number by typing math.random with open and close brackets at the end, and to times the maximum to add the minimum to, and I had to end this with a semicolon, and the return to results. So basically what this code means is that when from the maximum number down to the minimum, it will return with a different result. So we're going to scroll down further here, but first I'm going to explain the code of how I got the wasps to go down the grid. So all I had to do is really wasp1 x dot y equals wasp1 x dot y plus 3. So, and with this if, so wasp1 x dot y, if this wasp here is greater than the stage height. So simpling it down, so really if the wasp leaves the scene, then it's going to trace, so it's going to come back up to the top. Well, wasp1 x dot y equals minus 50 means it will go down. But before I added the if, wasp is greater than stage height command. Basically, this wasp1x.y was below this one was below the command for the wasp to move on this column here. And basically what it was going to do, it was just going to go down and do nothing else. I'll reorganize this. And so, going back to the var, so I had to create a variable within a variable, and this variable, nx colon number. So the variable, so I'm linking two variables in one. So this number equals math.flow. It's linking with this variable here, and on the top okay, sorry, I had to change my comment there because it didn't make sense. So I created a variable nx, which is meaning the number, and so a variable means another variable, so they're all going to link. So I had to create another variable which is linking with the function that I've made a variable for within its brace brackets. So I had to create random numbers between 100 to 1000. Right now, this is where it gets really complicated. Okay, so the way this is formatted, random numbers, the brackets, and open brackets and closing brackets, it starts with the minimum number. So the minimum number is going to be 0, and the maximum number is going to be about 1100. So basically, in this variable, it's giving more than one result. It's giving countless results. And I had to basically, so then I had to assign this symbol to the variable and trace it. Tracing it basically means repeating, so it's going to loop and never end. And that was how the wasps in particular here are just going down. And see, there, that's the wasp that came down from this part at the bottom of the x-axis here. So you can see it's actually randomly generating numbers. And with what I did with this sort of technique to generate a random number, I've changed it around. I've assigned it to a symbol, and the symbol I've changed to trace, and assigned the symbol to the variable within the variable within the variable. So what it's doing is I've actually changed the code from just being a simple pressing a button to make a different number into creating an asset that will spawn at a different number. And I did the same with Wasp 2, but I gave it different stats, so it's going to spawn at different locations. And I also gave NX2, so because when I've named them NX, it was clashing with Wasp number 1 and Wasp number 2. They were both clashing and the game was breaking. This is because in programming you're going to have to be very specific with your namings and assignments, because if you just make some that are duplicate, and well, if for example doppelgangers, if 1. So if I make a doppelganger of the same symbol with the same, so for example, here we've got these instance names for those wasps. Okay, if they were both all called wasp 1x, then it'll be really confusing for the program of Adobe Flash, because you have to be really specific of what you're naming. You can't just have a name for one. You can't just have one name for two different assets, because if you do that, then it's going to confuse the program. So one of the other lessons is that you're going to have to be very, very specific. Very specific. And now we're going to talk about the hitbox. Okay, so what I had to do is I had to make an if function. So if this b dot hit test object wasp on x. So basically, think of it as there's going to be a square around this wasp, and that wasp and that square is around the wasp, basically protecting it. So I have made a trigger. So think of it as making a box that triggers an event, an enter frame on enter function. So what I had to do was, so if this b tests the object, so if it hit tests it, so if it tests and hits the object, that is wasp 1x, wasp 2x, wasp number 3, etc. And this little tab in particular here is where it's basically, if there's more than one, if you're going to add more than one. So it's an OR. It's like, think of it as OR. Like, physically typing OR. Okay? Because if you just basically type OR, it's actually a different function. So what would they have to do is this symbol here basically represents OR into, like, basically translates OR in English. So if B interacts with number 1 or number 2 or number 3, then this, I've added another brace within that if function. So when these interact, so when this B interacts with this wasp or the other two, then it's going to remove the event listener that is the B. So you're basically no longer going to be able to move. You're just going to stop. And once this happens, this this event listener will be confiscated from the game, and it will go to and stop to seeing the end. And I'm going to demonstrate. In the end is where the screen is the game over screen. So get touched by number 1. So I'm going to demonstrate, and number 2 and number 3. So they all work as they should. So I basically created a hitbox, or more technically a trigger. And that was how I made. So that was it, a demonstration on how I made the wasp move and evil killers. So this is it for the game as a whole. I will be explaining how, like, my understanding of functions and symbols, showing my understanding of the user interface, and that'll be it for now. And that's my development blog for the important parts of the game, the big meaty chunks of the game that basically makes the game the game. So that'll be it from me.